Caribbean businesses are playing among giants. Access to capital is an essential part of doing business. Businesses need access to debt, equity, credit, and smart capital. When we look at Guyana's stock exchange market, we can see that their market capitalization stands at a little below 2 billion US dollars. When we look at Trinidad and Tobago, which is the largest stock exchange market in the Caribbean basin market capitalization, we can see that they have about $17.65 billion under asset management. Now, when we look at the United States of America, we are seeing that they have approximately 25 trillion US dollars in market capital. Absolutely necessary for us to raise and amplify the conversation around capital markets and capital access for businesses. The life, the success, the growth, and regional and international integration of businesses depends on access to capital. We at Global Capital Inc. and 10X Branding and Marketing LLC out of New York invite you to join this conversation. Be blessed and see you on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen who are viewing us from across the world. My name is Gary Thompson. I'm a business development consultant by profession, a humanitarian by nature. Welcome to another broadcast of Global Capital Inc. online radio and television program. Today I have an extremely talented young lady in my presence. Her name is Felecia Boyle Bazard, and she has an impeccable track record in business. But I will ask her to do justice to that impeccable track record that I know that she had. Felecia, would you care to share with the general public a little about you? I want to hear it from you.
Sure, Gary. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome.
And I'm just excited to be a part of your program and also to share a little bit about what I do and where I am and what my space relates to. So my name is Felecia Boyle Bazard, and I'm referred to friendly as Fee. So everyone calls me Fee. I was born in Guyana. Grew up in the Berbice River. So born to farming parents. My parents were both farmers. So spent my early childhood in the Berbice River, where I learned my humbleness and learned to keep my feet grounded. Where, I would row to school every day, to primary school, an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours to get to school, to and from school. Then after primary school, I headed into New Amsterdam. So as you know, New Amsterdam is in Region 6, and I attended Berbice High School. and I attended there for quite some time. Actually, the thing about it is I learned my first lesson on failure in year 1 of high school, because I had to repeat first year high school. I just did not get it. So in addition to being, I was bullied initially, coming from the country area and being in the city. So, it was an interesting journey, but not blaming that on my failure. That was totally mine. I did not adapt myself and
But
adjust.
that failure certainly does not define you at this moment.
Of course not. But that's what I remember, as the first taste of it. And that's what fueled my success after that, actually, because I remember looking at my parents and saying, you know what, I can never do this, have this happen again. And so after that, it was, let's get this. So completed high school, actually completed with 8 subjects in CXC and finished in the top 2 of the school. And right after that, I left for St. Vincent and the Grenadines,
awesome.
where I did my A levels. Following my A levels, I actually transitioned to the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, where I completed my undergrad in accounting. A couple of days ago, you would have seen that the University of the West Indies has been rated in the top tier of universities. And I can really attest to that. It was really first class education. I enjoyed my time there and built several lifelong friendships around the Caribbean. And that's where my network started. And it's, as you know, in business and everything else, is important to have that network. And University of the West Indies. Then after University of the West Indies, I completed my master's in finance, MBA Focus Finance from Nova Southeastern University in Miami. I also went on to being certified in accounting. So I'm a public accountant, a certified public accountant, and registered with, actually licensed in New Hampshire in the US to practice. Shortly after that, I joined Deloitte in the Bahamas, worked for a while, and then moved over to UBS. And so, I may look 16, but I've been around the block for a while. And so I've been in the—
I love that.
I've been in the corporate world. And then after UBS, I transitioned into my private practice. So opened an accounting business consulting firm. And so I've been there for the past 6 years in the Bahamas. And then recently, a year ago, I established my firm in Guyana. Our same branch, so a branch of the existing executive business solution in Guyana. In addition to that, I've created my own personal brand, which is Fees Financial, where it's more, and this is where we're connecting from an education standpoint, just not only theory, but the practical side of the education. And my personal brand is Fees Financial. So I can be found on YouTube, Facebook, FEE, apostrophe S, Financial. And so, and here I am. My passion is the SME space. I love to speak with young entrepreneurs, as well as upcoming and budding businessmen and women. I absolutely love the SME space. And that's me in a big fat nutshell.
Okay. One thing I want to take away from everything that you've said, I want to get access to that special cup and that special plate that you have been eating from that is keeping you so young. I need some.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Most welcome. All right. Today we are going to be embarking on a very interesting conversation, and I do believe that this kind of conversation should be amplified throughout the wider Caribbean based on where we're at. Today we're going to be discussing the importance of equity capital, and I just don't believe that we have enough conversation and awareness being built about how this financial market can be leveraged to grow, diversify, and expand and help businesses to integrate regionally and beyond. So the first question I want to put to you is, how important is equity capital to Caribbean business competitiveness?
And that's a great question. Thank you for it. But let's step back for a minute and define what equity capital is. Sometimes we hear the word, but we don't necessarily associate it right away. So if we look at equity capital, there are basically two types of capital, right? There's debt and there's equity. When we think about equity capital has to do with the investor having a stake in your business. That's the simplistic way of looking at it. But when we get further into equity capital, we'll realize that there are various levels of equity capital. So we have the primary equity capital market, and we have the secondary equity capital market. On the primary equity capital market, you have the private offerings and you have the public offering on the equity primary market. The secondary, now we get into the actual trading, the platform, the trading platform, and the ongoing recycling of existing equity products. So we have the regular stocks, and then we get into the FX, the over-the-counter market and stuff like that. So from an SME perspective, which I think is the direction we're on, and both of our target market, we focus, our main focus should be on the primary side of things, because, we've been in business for a little while, we're gonna start our business, and we wanna see how to either obtain capital to fund that idea, or we've been in business and we want capital to expand on what we've already been doing. So when it comes to your direct question as to how important it is, it's extremely important. We are faced with numerous challenges when it comes to being financed, and the Caribbean, as we know it, we're still third world. Twist it, turn it how we want it, we still lie in the third world side of things, and that's due to numerous reasons why we remain in the third world category. So from an SME perspective, we need to be focused on, I would say, the private offering of the primary market. So what that basically is, it's where you raise funds either from an angel investor or just word of mouth, where we have a business plan and we pitch it to investors saying, look, I want you to be part of my firm. I want you to sow into the firm, and so that we can develop this. So it is extremely important to the SME market versus us just thinking we need to go and get that big high interest rate debt capital, and be forever just servicing the debt rather than really trying to grow the business. I think you're muted.
Yeah. Awesome. I think on your last points is very important. And I think there is where you draw the distinction between debt capital and equity capital.
Mm-hmm.
I think with debt capital, you are saddled with monthly amortized collateralized debt obligation. As against equity, you may have annual dividends to pay out as against monthly debt obligations. So that may give you a tremendous competitive advantage in the equity space. But I just want to throw out here, it appears that CARICOM, it's more than 150 years behind the international stock exchange market. And you said it, we are still developing economies, we are still third world economies in so many different ways. When we look at the international stock exchange market and what they're able to do in terms of providing equity for businesses, one, we see they have been in operation since I think the 17th of May, 1792. That's about 228 years ago. And we can learn tremendously from those industries. I think in CARICOM, Trinidad being one of the largest stock exchange market based on the market capitalization, they have been in operation, I think, since 1981, I think, if I'm not wrong. And their market capitalization is about, I think, 17.68 billion US dollars. Where do you think that we are still, how far away are we as Caribbean in the equity capital space with a catch-up game in looking at the developed economies? You did mention that one, we are still third world economy. Among Caribbean leaders, among Caribbean businesses, do you think that there is enough conversation, there is that great will to ensure that we put our best foot forwards to ensure that we represent private sector ability to access equity capital?
Excellent question, Mr. Thompson. So now, regarding the stock exchange and just the countries in the CARICOM area, we suffer a lot from inflation, and so essentially the effects of inflation is that you have a minimized middle class, so to speak. And the middle area is where the SME really lie. You would find SME companies in that middle income bracket. And so if we have a big lower level or low income, and let's deal with businesses now, very not even in the SME side, but micro. So a lot of our businesses get stuck in the micro area. And then there's the large side of things. So we have the large entities. And because it is so hard to get to the stock exchange, we have a lot of these large entities being stuck on just being large and not being able to do an IPO. So we spoke about the primary market, and we said that, you know, there's the public side of the primary market. In order to penetrate the public side of the primary market, you would have to do an IPO. And in order to do an IPO, you know, you have to get your books extremely right and your audits well. you have to, the capital that you would have to put up to get to that IPO, it's usually way out of the reach of a lot of the large businesses even. So we find ourselves in the Caribbean in the on the secondary market that only a few entities are able to get to this market. So to your question directly, it has to, our regulators would have to take an actual introspective look. They have to step back and look at what are the requirements to get to the secondary market. We have our secondary market here. Every single day when you hear the New York Stock Exchange, the bell ring to open up the exchange, we see people clapping. And that's usually because somebody is doing an IPO.
Yeah.
How often do we see Caribbean businesses on whichever stock exchange clapping, saying that we're doing an IPO? And my assumption is that the criteria for getting on or issuing an IPO, there's so many aspects
loops to go through. Yeah,
that it makes it almost impossible for a large business to get in. So that's one aspect which needs to be addressed before we get to how viable these are. So the playing field has to be looked at, and of course, after you do the IPO, what are the follow-up regulations to keep them on the straight and narrow? Those might also be, not really achievable. So we need to take a look there and really look to see. Absolutely, we need to protect investors because our monies are hard earned and we need to protect that. So definitely, but there is a thin line between protecting and creating barriers to entry. So that's something for the various regulators to look at. Guyana and Trinidad and everywhere else. And then secondly, once we get that middle income bracket up from where inflation, is reduced, and we start booming or boosting that SME space, then we'll find that more SMEs will hit into the larger zone, and not only will they benefit from the primary private market, but they'll be able to actually do the primary public market with an IPO. But of course, after the regulators would have re-looked at what is required to really hit the IPOs, because we set our goals, but are we setting our people up for failure or not even? The goals are so big that we don't know. I don't know. You deal with different religions, whether that be Christianity or Muslim or Hinduism or whatever. And how do you define whatever you believe in? Is it so out of scope that you can't even attempt to be redeemed or saved or whatever you term it? Similarly, on the financial market, how achievable are these, and who can really achieve them when you think about it? And sorry, but it's just a lot to get.
No. I got you, and I totally agree with you. I do believe that as we look at the pre-qualification for a business to be listed on the stock exchange market, meaning IPO, initial public offer. One of those pre-qualification we're seeing in, let us take, for example, Guyana. It's about $500 million to be able to do that. And the average companies that is desperately in need of capital and might be looking at the public option.
Yes.
Most of them cannot reach there, and these are businesses that has tremendous potential to grow and scale and integrate into, regional and international markets. But because of the fact that they may be just dependent on a public offer, the IPO, and they are going
Right.
to be a major barrier to that. Along with that, we are seeing among Caribbean nations, they may not be necessarily be a strong private equity market where you can easily access, venture capitalists and private equity investors. But just before I say more on this, you are a subject matter expert as relates to equity in the financial market. What are some of the options outside of public capital, public offering for businesses in the equity capital space? Perhaps merger and acquisition might be something you want to look at, but what are some of those portfolios that exist in the private equity space that businesses can tap into?
Sure. And Mr. Thompson, the thing about it is, before we even get to tapping into capital, I hope that our SMEs are very serious about their financial management aspect. Because if you're not keeping proper records and you don't have proper financial statements, and you're not diligent in that area, then I think the discussion regarding, what the options are, should not even be had at that time. We first.
Great point. And just before you go on to answer, and based on what you're saying there, they also have to move away from this sole trader and mom and pop idea, and they now have to become LLCs, because in most cases, when you're going to trade publicly or trade privately, you cannot trade as a sole trader.
Right. So even if when we get into what are the options, what do they have available to them, we have to first ask them, where do you stand financially? Is your business making financial sense? Where do you stand? And that's not a I believe, it's a flip your numbers up, let me see where you stand. And if we have to go filing through books, exercise pages or whatever to find, what the receipts are and the bills are, then we're not ready for the equity market. So we have to take, I spoke about regulators and all of that. We have to take that responsibility as business providers to ensure that we keep proper records and we see where we are. Because in order to get from an equity perspective, your books need to be in order and you need to show where you're actually making a profit, or there is, there's capacity for profit, but you just need to increase that capacity. And if you increase the capacity, you're going to make profit because you have good projections, and of course the numbers to back it up. And so once you're at that point, then I can tell you, okay, so you're here now, what are our options? And the best thing that I've seen for the SME space is that you ensure you have a proper business plan. Where do you see yourself now? Basically the business plan, and where do you see yourself over the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you want to go, and what do you intend to use the capital for? So it's important that, one, we know where we stand financially, And two, we have a business plan or a blueprint as to how we want to see things. Once we have that, then, you spoke about the venture capitalists dealing with, you submit your business plan and they see or they find investors to invest in your business. So essentially, and like you rightly said, if you're a sole trader, then that's difficult, right? Because you're technically the only investor. And then you may want to look with your lawyer or your accountant what my options are in terms of a different business structure when I'm thinking about capital. So I may need to go and do an INC. In Guyana, it's termed INC. So, it's similar to the LLC or the LTD. It's where the liability is limited, but in Guyana, it's termed incorporated. So you may want to incorporate your entity and or maybe form a partnership, however you decide between you and your financial advisor. Once that's done, you have your business plan, you have your financial records, then you're ready for the next thing. As good Caribbean parents, they would tell us, you're ready for marriage. You got to make sure that you keep yourself in order. You could cook, all of that stuff, and I'm feminist without apology. So men and women need to learn how to cook these days, right? Just how my daughter needs to cook, my son needs to cook. So in order to be ready for the capital market, you have to make sure that you have these key items down pat, right? And then your financial advisor, such as yourself, would be able to advise them on, okay, so this is where you stand. What is your risk appetite? What are you looking for? Because you have to determine the actual business risk. What is it that they're looking to take on? If they don't want nobody part of the shop, then equity capital is not for you. If you don't want to share your books and have people as part of your business, then you may need to look at debt. Debt is not bad. Debt is not bad at all. It's just a matter of what the terms and conditions are. So in a nutshell, Mr. Thompson, our people need to ensure that they are good financial stewards and they keep their records in order. They know what their historical and their present position look like. Then they need to make sure that they have a full-fledged proper business plan where it shows proper projections, proper analysis of the market, etc. And these are the things that if we're ready, we would see the value of these aspects. Then once that is done, your financial advisor would then say, okay, so do we sit and just call a private meeting where you have your people there and possible investors within your network that you want to pitch to? And so you sit in a conference room, you talk about your business plan, and you talk about the offering that they can buy shares into your business and what the share price is, etc. And you back that up with what the business plan says and the projections. And once that is done, it's simple. Give me the money, I give you some share certificates, and we're now married in the business world. We're now joined to the hip, where you need to see everything. I need to flip everything up and you need to see, and we need to know what's going on. What is it? Monthly dividends? Is it quarterly? Is it semi-annually? How do we do this thing, or do we lock a period off and then go on? So this thing is not a wake up today and say, I need to hit the capital market. No, 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 no. It's becoming very familiar with where you stand and where you want to go before you hit that market. And there are various options: venture capital, private offering, we have angel investors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I really love the term that you use earlier on. You say proper financials and so forth. And I smile because the reason I smile is because the research is showing me that we have a number of persons that develop their financial projections and develop their business plan, not from what we will call primary market data or from reliable secondary data. They are using what you call speculative data to develop that, and that could be very, very misleading. And of course, if you go into the private equity investors, the private equity investors will do their due diligence. They will go to the ground, they will ensure an experienced one will go to the ground, get the information, and before they make an investment decision with you. So you're perfectly correct. The housekeeping has to be, top notch when you go into the private equity, especially the private equity market, because the PE, they are risk averse. Beyond looking at the potential of the market to cash flow, they're going to want to look at your team dynamics. They're going to want to look at your historical financial data, market analytics, and a range of other issues. So you are perfectly correct with that. I just want to point out something though, just to give some hope. In the developed world, we have a number of VCs, those are venture capitalists, who may invest with businesses pre-income. And that creates a little loophole for businesses to get in. But even when they're going to invest with you pre-income, you will have to understand the projection, the financial market projection. And that cannot be based on speculation. Like, for example, there are many developed, let us say new technology is being developed. Let us say new research is being done into the medical field. And they may have absolutely no historical financial data, but based on the demand trends, the demand curve that you're seeing, they may be able to develop their business plan and make a pitch to investors and get income pre-IPO. But even doing that, you have to do tremendous work on the ground to ensure that you're succeeding. Now, you mentioned the issue of risk, and I just want you to go a little deeper into that. What are known risks associated with equity capital, and how can they mitigate risk? Like one example, for us, as we prepare to get into the equity capital space, one of the ways in which we try to mitigate risk is that, one, we know that access to capital is not the way at all. So for us, it's important to do the market research. In doing your market research, you want to ensure that you know your specific target market. You want to know that you know your market size. You want to know that you understand the market potential to invest. You want to know that you understand the market enablers. And you find very often there are players that are coming into the business space without understanding the market enablers and building out relationships with the enablers. And failing to do that can put capital at risk. How do you see the risk factor associated with capital?
So from a risk perspective, it's either the initial owner of the business or the new investors. And looking at risk from the original owner, your main risk is that you're taken over. Someone come in and they take over your entire business and kick you out. So yeah, so you have to, you have to, the first thing, if that's a concern of yours, then you want to make sure that you retain the majority shareholding.
At least 51%.
At least 51%. And even if you have 50%, you make sure that you go in with someone else who is putting in. You're very familiar with that person, or you know. But the main thing is you get your 51%, so that you can retain some level of autonomy over the business. In addition, be careful who you select as your board members, because the board of directors, if you have investors coming in, then they would require that you have a board. And so your board carries a lot of weight, and your board has a lot of say into how the business is run. So make sure that you take a prominent position, possibly chair, or you know, at least a board of director member, if you're deciding to go that way. So that's your main risk. Of course, there's a risk of failure, but that's more so from the investor who's coming in. Yes, it's your risk as well, but more so someone who doesn't have sweat equity per se, where you know it's their brain idea and they love this business, and they don't have that. What they have is the financial risk of losing their investment. So what if the business goes belly up? Then they're left without, you know, what we say, man and cutlass gone, right? So they're left to hold the risk, or to bear that brunt. So when it comes to the external investor, they need to make sure that your business plan is saying something good, and referring to what you were what you said about the proper research was done, and you have not only numbers based on speculation, but actual numbers, market number data to go by. Either if you have a history, or just the market history, so that you can show some solid stuff. So in my view, those are the main two risks, where you just need, from the original owner, you need to make sure that you protect yourself and have everything in order. And from the external investor coming in, that this is a solid company that you should actually put your money into.
Okay. And I love what you said. There are risks for the original owners going into this if you do not know what you're doing. Because again, when an investor comes in, an investor may not be in for the rest of life. So they're the private equity investors, they're coming in with an exit point. And in most cases, if you can buy them out, and if you don't have an exit strategy, there is where they may carry you IPO. And if you go IPO, it means that you don't have privacy anymore. So there's a lot to be looked at as businesses prepare themselves to be ready for private equity and perhaps scale up. Not that there's any harm going IPO, but you have to know we prepare for it. And I don't
Well,
think,
if you retain your majority shareholding,
yeah,
they can't take you to an
well, that's
IPO.
true. That's
Right.
true. You can still negotiate it out of that, but certainly. All right. Um, how do you see the future of Caribbean economies and business access to equity capital? Um, are we near? Are we far away from equity capital being as common as debt capital in the Caribbean?
Well, Mrs. Thompson, I'm actually very I have a very positive outlook on the Caribbean. The Caribbean is very near and dear to my heart. As I mentioned, I'm a Pelican girl. I have a lot of Pelican pride, and
I love
you
that.
know, going to school with persons from all around the Caribbean, I know the caliber of brain that we have in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
We have fantastic people in the Caribbean. Specifically looking at Guyana and the upward trajectory of Guyana, I'm very, very hopeful as to what's to come. But garbage in equal garbage out.
You got
And
it.
while I am not dependent on government, I think that the governments of the Caribbean need to take a closer look at what we discussed at the beginning of this program, the legislation, the regulation aspect of the market, the secondary market of capital of equity. And so they need to spend a lot of time looking at what they have right now, comparing our model to the first world, but of course, tailoring that model to our various countries. Because, when a fast food joint goes into a country, they can't necessarily offer exactly what they offered in a say a North America economy or a European economy. They have to tailor that to the Caribbean market. So if, for example, you have a chicken making entity coming in, they have to make sure they put your spices. Likewise, let's compare our secondary market to the wider world and the first world that have everything coming in. But let's tailor that to our people, our uniqueness, and make it affordable and reachable, achievable for our people. So while I think that the government and regulators need to take that look, I still believe, in the capital side of the market, where it's driven by us, by investors, by service providers like yourself, and of course, Fees Financial and EBS. But so we need to then figure out from a investor standpoint and financial advisor standpoint, how do we get our people, our target market, our SMEs ready for capital market? How do we do more of these that we're doing right now, educating our SMEs, telling them more about financial management and business planning, and of course, educating them about what's out there on the primary private, primary public, and of course, then the secondary market. So it will take a symbiotic kind of relationship to take this thing forward, where you have the regulators and the government but you also have the capital, the people, the SMEs, and those need to come together to make that happen. So while I see good GDP growth projected for Guyana, those are paper projections, and we're not going to get there unless we really start drumming up the SME, because the SME space is really what grows GDP.
Exactly. Because you're right, the GDP growth is largely based on the output from oil. And, we certainly just can't depend on that, because I think, Guyana is said to be one of the fastest growing economies in this part of the world. Projection to grow our GDP by over 80%. That was before the pandemic. I think it has come down to about 41% today. But of course, you're right, we just cannot depend on the oil. I just want to say a couple of things very quickly. I really admire your optimism in Caribbean leaders, and I wish that I had all of that optimism. I want to be there, but I want to make reference to a couple of things. As we look at Guyana's stock exchange market, we see that on the market capitalization, we have a little below 2 billion US dollars on the capitalization. When we look at Trinidad, which is one of the largest stock market that we have within the Caribbean based on market capitalization, we see that they have about 17.65 billion US dollars. And that looks a little admirable at Caribbean standard. But when we look at the developed world, as we were making some of those analysis, we are seeing that American market capitalization stands at about 25.9 trillion US dollars, when in the Caribbean, the biggest player don't even have $1 trillion on the investment, with businesses. So we have a far way to go, and as you're right, this kind of conversation has to be amplified, so businesses and aspiring entrepreneur and all stakeholders can really get a genuine understanding as to what a mixed capital market represents, and we all can get on board, because you're right, this has to be a symbiotic effort. All stakeholders has to come to the table with a fair degree of understanding of what this means, not only for GDP growth, but also for business diversification and human transformation in the whole process. Because one of my arguments is that GDP growth does not represent human economic growth, and we want that to be, and human economic growth can fuel a thriving stock exchange market, because here is where they're going to be investing in the stocks, the bonds, the mutual funds, and here is where those capital goes right back into business. So there's so much of work that has to be done here as we continue to evaluate this market. I want to thank thank you so much. I really love picking your brains. I think that you are one of those strong, iconic figures that I just like talking about the equity capital space. And in closing, I want to ask you, what recommendation do you have for Caribbean leaders relating to the equity capital market?
And I love chatting with you as well. Thank you very much for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
Okay.
When it comes to our leaders, like I said, we have to go back and think about what we have right now. So my main advice would be for our central banks to get in contact with, the Ministry of Finance, as well as the legislative arm of government, and come up, do some consulting in that area to see where we stand realistically. And this is throughout, looking at what you mentioned about Trinidad. I've lived in Trinidad for over 3 years, and I like Trinidad. Um, Trinidad has gained tremendously from their oil, right? And I hope we can also tap into that from a Guyanese perspective, because while the oil growth is good, we need to make those oil monies flow into other areas and other sectors. And once we have that flowing, of course, we could, from a Guyanese perspective, hit that closer to 17 billion and beyond.
Yeah.
But that is not going to change without tackling the inflation aspect. Yes, inflation, we would say, once GDP grows, then we expect inflation to come down, but it has to be a focused approach, and it has to be where we have better legislation that governs the secondary market and makes it a little easier to penetrate. The barriers need to be a little more accommodating to welcome the SME towards that larger sector into the secondary. But it's not all lost. Like you said, there venture capitals out there that want to invest in startups, want to invest in good ideas. But we have to make sure that once we get that good idea, we make it affordable, we make it robust in a business plan. And that's where the governments of the Caribbean come in to subsidize SMEs with business planning and with financial management. We know that the Center for Local Business Development is doing a lot in terms of education. And so we need other similar avenues so that persons can not only learn, but can also be subsidized to getting their business plans done. In the Bahamas, there is the Small Business Development Center. And that center is a funding agency where SMEs can actually send in their business plan. The center actually gives vouchers for small businesses to tap into business planning consultants to assist with that business planning aspect. And then they send the business planning arena in. So what I would advise, in addition to looking at your legislation, look to see how you can subsidize your SMEs even more, and not only from a debt perspective, but from a equity perspective, where they're able to do their proper business plans, and they're able to get with a financial advisor who can put them in the right route. So I have a very positive outlook, but it will take persons like yourself and of course us to push this forward and get persons really realizing, the government's really energized into focusing on the SME space.
You're perfectly correct. And what I will do, I will try to add your details at the back end of this podcast.
I appreciate
so persons can contact you, because I know that you're a subject matter expert in the business planning. We all here are subject matter expert in the business planning and ensure that we can help businesses to get a proper start and to grow and scale. Last that I want to add is that I just came back from North America, and I went to the ground and I really see a number of community business development platforms in almost all the states that you're moving around. There is this tremendous passion by the government to provide that enabling space for businesses to take off. So exactly what you were talking about, that community access for businesses, to access those, subject matter experts, to have their business plan built out the way it should be built out, and then to be linked to financial institution, and then to be linked to market access. We've seen all of these things are operational in the developed world. And I do believe that as we look at things from a Caribbean perspective, we have to take some of those pages out from the developed world and make it work within the Caribbean. Of course, we're going to put the Caribbean twist and the Caribbean flavor to it, but I believe it can work. All right.
So you went the next step.
You got it.
Good stuff. Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure chatting with you, Mr. Thompson.
Oh, definitely. And I can't wait for the next time that we're going to be doing this again. As I said, you have a tremendous of information that I think, can add tremendous value to the conversation. And on this platform, I will pick your brains as much as I can. Thanks again, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care, you too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Caribbean businesses are playing among giants. Access to capital is an essential part of doing business. Businesses need access to debt, equity, credit, and smart capital. When we look at Guyana's stock exchange market, we can see that their market capitalization stands at a little below $2 billion US. When we look at Trinidad and Tobago, which is the largest stock exchange market in the Caribbean basin market capitalization, we can see that they have about $17.65 billion under asset management. Now, when we look at the United States of America, we are seeing that they have approximately $25.9 trillion US in market capitalization. This definitely speaks of a tremendous capital advantage. Among Caribbean nations, it is absolutely necessary for us to raise and amplify the conversation around capital markets and capital access for businesses. The success, growth, and regional and international integration of businesses depends on access to capital. We at Global Capital Inc. and 10X Branding and Marketing LLC out of New York invite you to join this conversation. Be blessed and see you on the other side.